I live in a small suburb outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a house I rent just off a busy road. It rains a lot here, but last spring's storms were something else. I remember one night in particular, when the thunder was shaking the windows, and the rain was coming down so hard, I couldn't see the street at all through my front window. The gutters were overflowing, and the streetlights looked like they were underwater. It was the kind of storm that makes you grateful to be inside, warm and dry, with nowhere to go. It was already late, close to midnight, and I just finished putting away some dishes when my phone rang. The number was unknown. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something about the storm made me pick up. Maybe it was the way the wind was howling, or maybe I just didn't want to feel so alone in that moment. There was a woman on the other end, her voice shaky and desperate. She sounded young, maybe in her 20s, and she was talking fast, like she was afraid the call would drop at any second. She said her car had broken down just a little ways from my house. She was low on battery and saw my porch light, so she hoped someone might be able to help her. She just needed a hand to push her car out of a ditch, even if just for a few minutes. I froze for a moment, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the rain hammering the roof. The storm was so loud I could barely hear her. I looked out the window, but I couldn't see anything. No headlights, no movement, just the sheets of rain. There was no car, no sign of anyone on the road. I told her I thought it would be safer to call for roadside assistance, but she kept insisting she didn't want the police or a tow truck, just some help from a neighbor. She said she was scared, that she didn't want to get in trouble, and that she'd be gone as soon as her car was out. Before I could say much more, the call ended. Just a click, and then nothing but the sound of the storm. My heart was racing. I stood there for a while, staring out into the darkness, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence, just someone in need. But something about the call didn't sit right with me. Why my house? Why not knock on the door, or at least pull up where I could see her? Why not want the police involved if she was really stranded? 5 minutes passed, maybe less, and then my phone rang again. This time it was a different number. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. This time, it was a man. Calm, but with an edge I couldn't place. He said he was looking for his sister, described the woman's voice I'd just heard, and asked if I'd seen her around. He wanted to know if there was a house with big windows and a porch light on, if I was home alone, that sort of thing. The way he kept asking if I was alone and what lights were on threw me off. It was like he knew more than he should. I remember feeling trapped between wanting to be polite and realizing I might be talking to someone dangerous. I tried to keep my answers vague, but he kept pressing. He asked if I could step outside and check the road, see if I could spot her car. I told him the rain was too heavy, that I couldn't see anything, and that I'd call the police if I saw anyone in trouble. He went quiet for a second, then just hung up. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking I heard footsteps on the porch, or the creak of the gate in the wind. I'd get up, look out the window, but it was just the storm. The next day, I tried to brush it off as a weird prank, but the feeling of unease stuck with me. A few nights later, during another storm, I heard slow tapping on the front door. Not knocking, just a steady, patient tap, 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 like someone was waiting for me to cave, to go outside and help. I never opened up. I just sat in the dark, phone in hand, listening to the rain and the tapping, heart pounding so hard I thought it might drown out the storm. Then, one night, I caught a shadow through the rain-streaked window, a couple of figures standing under the street lamp, just watching my house. They were holding something tall, maybe an umbrella, or maybe a tool like a crowbar or a fence post, something you'd find in a field or a barn. I couldn't tell for sure, but the way they stood there, unmoving, made my skin crawl. The rain was coming down so hard it blurred their faces, but I could see them watching, waiting. I stayed inside, lights off, hoping they'd leave. I called the police, but by the time anyone came, the street was empty again. The officers told me it was probably just kids messing around, but I could tell they didn't really believe it. They told me to keep my doors locked and call if anything else happened. When morning came, I stepped outside and saw muddy footprints leading away from my porch. The rain had washed away most tracks, but those prints were clear. Someone had been there, walking in the storm, watching me all night. There were two sets side by side, and one of them was much larger than the other. They led down the driveway and disappeared into the mud by the road. After that, I started keeping the porch light off during storms. I stopped answering unknown numbers, and I made sure every window and door was locked tight before the rain started. I never found out if anyone really needed help, or if it was all a setup to get me outside. Maybe it was just a couple of people looking for trouble, or maybe it was something worse. But I did learn to trust my gut, and to be careful when strangers call on stormy nights. Even now, whenever the rain starts pounding on the roof, and the wind rattles the windows, I can't help but remember those voices on the phone, the tapping on the door, and the shadows waiting just beyond the porch light. My landlord warned me that Portland gets a lot of rain, but I wasn't prepared for just how relentless it could be. I'd only moved into this house a few weeks earlier, and was still getting settled, boxes stacked in corners, half my clothes still in suitcases, and not a single security camera installed yet. The neighborhood seemed safe enough, and honestly, I was more worried about the rain ruining my shoes than anything else. That day, the rain was constant, a low, steady drumming on the roof that felt like it would never stop. The sky stayed a flat gray all day, and everything outside seemed muted and drained of color, the kind of dreary weather that seeps into your bones. I remember standing at the kitchen sink, watching the water run down the window in thick, blurry sheets, and thinking I'd never seen a city so wet. A day or two before, I'd noticed a crack in the kitchen window. It wasn't big, but it was enough to let in a draft and a little water, if the wind was right. I called my landlord to report it, and he said he'd send someone to take a look later that day. He didn't give me a name or a time, just said to expect a knock. Mid-afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I remember hesitating for a second, listening to the rain pounding the porch roof, before opening it. A man stood outside, muddy boots, rain-speckled jacket, and what looked like a small camera or phone in his hand. He was older, with a short beard and a tired look in his eyes. He said he was sent by my landlord to check the window damage. I let him in, figuring he was just another contractor. He wiped his boots on the mat, but left muddy prints anyway. He didn't say much, just nodded and asked to see the kitchen. I let him in, pointing out the crack in the glass. He crouched down, took a few photos, and ran his finger along the edge of the window. I expected him to ask about the weather, or make some small talk, but he was quiet. Too quiet. What started to bother me was how he moved through the house. He wasn't just inspecting the crack, he was taking photos of the window, but also of the corners of rooms, the back door, the locks, even the view out to the street. He'd pause at each exit, snapping a quick picture, then move on. When I asked what he was documenting, he gave me some vague explanation about insurance requirements and making sure everything's up to code. His answers were short, almost rehearsed. I started to feel uneasy. I realized I hadn't actually scheduled any official appointment, and my landlord hadn't mentioned sending anyone specific. It was like this guy had just appeared, using the rain as perfect cover. The storm outside was so loud, I could barely hear his footsteps on the hardwood. He finished up in the kitchen, then asked if he could see the rest of the house for a quick safety check. I hesitated, but he was already moving toward the hallway, snapping more photos. I followed him, trying to keep an eye on what he was doing. He paused at my bedroom door, took a picture of the window, then the closet, then the lock on the back door. He never asked permission, just moved from room to room, always with that little camera in his hand. After about 15 minutes and he said he was done, he thanked me, barely making eye contact, and stepped back out into the rain. I watched him walk down the driveway, but didn't see a work van or any company logo, just an old sedan parked a few houses down. He got in and drove off without looking back. A few hours later, just as the rain was starting to let up, there was another knock at the door. This time, a man in a proper uniform stood on the porch, holding a clipboard and a toolbox. He introduced himself, showed me a business card, and explained he was here to fix the window. He had a company van parked right out front, with the logo and everything. He looked confused when I told him someone had already come by. He checked his paperwork, shook his head, and said I must have been mistaken. He was the only one scheduled for the job. That's when it hit me. The first man had never been here to fix anything. I spent the rest of the evening replaying everything in my head. How he'd known to come by, how he'd moved through the house, what he'd taken pictures of. I called my landlord, who swore he'd only sent the one repairman and had no idea who the first guy was. I reported everything to the police the next day, but with only a sketchy description and no real proof of wrongdoing. They said there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrols in the area. For days after, I kept expecting to see that old sedan parked down the street or to hear another knock at the door. I started locking every window and door, even during the day. I bought a set of security cameras and installed them myself, rain or not. Every time the sky turned gray and the rain started up, I felt that same unease settle in my chest. Now, whenever those heavy Portland rains start up and the world turns gray and quiet, I can't help but wonder if that man is still out there somewhere. He's got a complete layout of my house or knows my routine, and I have no idea what he's planning to do with that information. Most people I know love the rain. They say it's calming, that it helps them sleep. I've never understood that. For me, rain is the opposite. It's like a switch flips in my brain, and suddenly I can't rest at all. The sound of it tapping on the roof, the way it echoes through the house, even the smell of wet concrete, it all keeps me wired and restless. I've actually seen a sleep doctor about it. He called it environmental insomnia, said some people's brains just don't handle certain sounds the way others do. Gave me a white noise machine and some breathing exercises, but none of it really helped. Last spring, it rained for days, nonstop. By Friday, I was running on fumes. I'd barely slept more than an hour or two each night, and by the end of the week, I felt like I was floating through my own life. My thoughts kept drifting, and I'd catch myself staring at nothing, just listening to the rain and feeling my nerves fray a little more with every drop. That Friday night, I was supposed to meet a friend for dinner, but by the time I left work, the storm had gotten worse. The streets were already flooding and the buses were running late. I remember standing under a flickering streetlight, rain soaking through my jacket, just hoping the next bus would show up before I lost feeling in my toes. When it finally did, I climbed aboard, shivering, and found a seat by the window. The bus was packed, everyone hunched over their phones or staring blankly ahead, the air thick with damp coats and tired sighs. The windows were fogged up, but every so often, a flash of lightning would light up the street outside, turning the glass into a mirror. I tried to focus on the rain, counting the drops as they raced down the window, anything to distract myself from the tension building in my chest. The bus felt too small, too crowded, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. I pressed my forehead to the glass, hoping the cold would help, and peered out into the storm. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shape moving between the streetlights, tall and thin, almost blending in with the shadows. But as the bus slowed for a stop, I realized it was standing perfectly still on the sidewalk, just outside the reach of the nearest lamp. It was too tall to be a person, and its arms hung at its sides in a way that didn't look right. The rain seemed to pour off it in sheets, but it never moved, never flinched, even as the wind whipped around it. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The shape was still there, watching the bus, or maybe just watching me. I couldn't see a face, just a pale, oval blur where a head should be, and those long, unmoving arms. The bus pulled away, and the shape vanished into the rain. I tried to tell myself it was just exhaustion, just my brain playing tricks, after too many sleepless nights. But every time the bus stopped, I found myself searching the sidewalks, half expecting to see it again. A few stops later, the bus driver announced the route was ending early, flooded roads ahead. I got off in a part of town I barely recognized, the rain coming down even harder now, and ducked into the nearest bus shelter. There were already a few people inside, huddled close to the walls, faces half hidden in the shadows. I tried to ignore them, focusing on the rain, but the shelter felt too small, the air too thick. I kept glancing out at the street, hoping to see headlights in a cab, anything. But the only thing moving was the rain, pouring down in endless sheets. My phone had no signal, and the battery was almost dead. I tried to distract myself by counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. But my mind kept drifting back to that shape on the sidewalk. At some point, I realized I wasn't the only one looking out into the storm. One of the other people in the shelter, a woman in a soaked red coat, was staring at the same spot I'd seen the figure. Her eyes were wide, and she kept glancing at me, like she wanted to ask if I saw it too. But neither of us said a word. The rain got even heavier, if that was possible. The streetlights flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw the shape again, closer this time, standing at the edge of the shelter's light. It was still, impossibly still, and the rain seemed to bend around it, like it was part of the storm itself. I blinked, and it was gone. The woman in the red coat let out a shaky breath and hurried out into the rain, disappearing down the street. The others in the shelter kept their heads down, pretending not to notice. I stayed put, too tired and too scared to move. Eventually, the rain let up enough for me to make a run for it. I walked home, glancing over my shoulder the whole way, but I never saw the shape again. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the storm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, waiting in the rain, something that only shows itself when you're too tired to trust your own eyes. I still don't know if it was real, or just a trick of exhaustion and nerves. But now, whenever the rain starts pounding on the roof and the world turns gray and quiet, I find myself watching the street, waiting to see if the storm will bring that shape back. And I hope, every time, that it doesn't.